Hey guys, welcome to this video. It's me, Kyrandis, just recovering from debilitating disease here, but this video is about my Lost Ark experience. I haven't really made too much content, and it's probably one of the few MMOs I've been playing where I actually haven't made too much content, and there's a lot of stuff going on with the game right now where people are leaving in droves, content creators are quitting here and there. There's other titles on the market like Diablo 4, Black Desert Online re-emerging. So none of that is sort of I'll speak on those like terms later, but I'm just going to talk about my Lost Ark experience. So I was playing this game for since launch actually, and I was working pretty much 6 days a week at the time when it did launch, and I was still juggling like character development as well as working two jobs essentially. There are problems and pros of the game as it progressed throughout its duration of existence. The story start, its cheesiness, its different landscapes that are clearly inspired by numerous other game titles out there, ocean and sailing at the beginning of the game and its hype, nothing of which is sort of like engaged upon today. It's very clearly shown that like these areas of the game are lacking development or just love itself from the developers. So like sailing, for instance, very little people do ocean and sailing content because it has very little significance to character growth in the stage of the game it's currently at. But then as well, I also enjoy the story, as cheesy as it was. And for an MMO story, it's actually quite decent. Most MMO stories kind of suck. But I don't really hold too high of a standard when it comes to MMO stories. If there's any MMO out there that ever does that very well and engaging, I think FF14 is the one that does that the best currently, and putting its own lore together. So basically, the story start all the way like in the launch of its experience, just getting to your ocean liner and your ship at the beginning of the game during its launch was quite exciting. I don't know if that's the case right now with new players. I have very little relational experience to new players coming into Lost Ark currently. I try not to gatekeep. I do try to ferry people and teach others who are like keen on learning mechanics and stuff in the game, which I think most of the time the mechanics in this game I actually think are quite trivial, but that could just be me being abnormal as a gamer. Whereas others might find it very difficult, but I think a lot of the mechanics that people struggle with in the game are actually quite trivial. But the other problem is that why they're coming into those difficulties is because they're being blown past like all of the content that leads up to those areas where the current like game structure and meta is at the moment, which I don't think is really good for a new player because there's just like a lack of learning or like understanding from like the easier raids in the lower areas, like Volton and Vicus, for instance. And then most of the time, there's a lot of parties just looking to clear it as fast as possible because of the homework problem. I'll talk more about that later, but for the most part, I'm just gonna go on the trajectory of like my beginning experience all the way till now, and essentially the lore of the story is that you're chasing sort of like a Diablo-esque sort of story in the first like three continents or something like that, all the way to like West Lutera, which was for the most part like it really re-signified like an ARPG sort of memorabilia since the dawn of like Diablo 2. For instance, our Arthatine, which is the mechanical city, and it feels like StarCraft in there. There's clearly references like from here and there, and then you go to like Phaeton, which is like an undead land, and you go to Southvern, which is like magics and sorceries and medieval stuff. Eventually reach like the dwarf town where everybody's getting drunk for some reason, which feels like a very huge heavy Warcraft theme, World of Warcraft theme for some reason. I don't know, maybe. I never really played World of Warcraft. And then we reach Hawaii Lili Island, which usually most people go WTF, like, why? What happened here? And they sort of give it a chuckle at how ridiculous it is, and it's a mysterious island of women. What could possibly go wrong except for like a clown? And there's clowns, and then you deal with the clown's assistant who will show you true love in the Abyss dungeons. It was quite a wacky experience. Like, me talking about it, that I don't even do these runs anymore, it was quite memorable. Okay, as ridiculous and absurd as it was memorable. People who were there know the memes and reiterated the memes and echoed it to each other, and it was fine. Then we have like Abyss dungeons and Abyss raids like Argos. I'm a little disappointed because like when I was anticipating Lost Ark's release for years, I never played the KR version or the Russian version because I just didn't want to have it semi-spoiled or like pre-knowledge. So I came into the whole game blind. The only thing I saw was like maybe some summoner gameplay, and I was planning to play Reaper as a main first, but then she didn't come until way later, so I ended up landing on a Deathblade, and I ended up playing a Gunlancer because I saw some Gunlancer gameplay in some of the parties I ran, and I thought it was really dope, so I started trying out other classes. The game is very alt-friendly, but I understand that not everybody likes to play a bunch of different alts, but I don't really know how they should address this issue. I do believe that the game offers like a lot of variety gameplay, given that there's so many different character classes you could play and easily get them up to where the current like game structure is or the game meta. Like it seems very accessible. Other MMOs I play, it's like an eternal like half year or like year long grind to even get like another character up there. Whereas in Lost Ark, it's like when they have like new classes come and events and whatever, and you're actively playing, it's literally like weeks and you're already into like where everybody else is. So I think the game's like quite accessible in that sense. It can be difficult for new players who are lacking resources though. So I'm not, again, this is what I mean by like I have a relational problem of being relatable to new players because I don't know their experience in that sense. And as well as like just there's like so many different ways to alleviate, I guess, the issues a little bit, but it's also hard to engage in it because there's not very many people trying to teach, as well as like people are just rather buy a bus, or like the busing culture or whatever, I don't think really teaches too much of anything to like new users, and the new users are kind of too afraid to fail. One of the problems of like the Legion raids versus like the Abyss raids, I believe the Abyss raids was sort of like where it started taking a turn for the worst in the game, because Argos had like 8 lives in the game, and this was actually one of the things why I looked forward to Lost Ark. The raid for Kai Shooter is not in the NA West version. If you look at Lost Ark betas, Steparo, for instance, has footage of it, of like a 16-man raid, I believe. It's a 16-man raid, and it's Kai Shooter, and there's cards of it in the game. It talks about like a Hellbeast Guardian or whatever, and it's like a gargantuan thing. I know KR players have expressed that it was kind of like lackluster and whatever and kind of boring, but I wanted to experience it anyways, like just even once or twice, or I don't know, even if it's monotonous. I think like just going into an arcade bash of like hitting a giant monster is like kind of fun, to be honest. Like sometimes you do want that turn off brain mode kind of fight. And it had like 20 lives that I saw in the top left corner of the footage, and I was like, 20 lives is very generous. You have 16 players. Like people can perform really well, and people can perform like not as good, like the casual players, for instance, who aren't trying to maximize their uptime and damage, for instance.
The trade merchant will leave quite soon.
Yes, and then that was interesting to me. I actually enjoyed that there was like a live system, because the Legion raids are a lot more punishing, because if you die to raid wipe mechanics or like mechanics that just blow up or insta kill you, it's punishing because you're just dead for the whole run. There's no way of coming back. That's one of the issues. Vulcan was the first instance of that in the Legion raids. Vulcan was like sort of like near South Fern, near the end of like Hawaii Lailai Island of Punica, and essentially Vulcan pretty much showcased like Vulcan was a very fair fight though. It's like I thought all the one-shot mechanics, as well as like what's going on in those fights, was actually very fair for new players and existing players. The number of like experienced or overgeared juicers in Vulcan during Ghost Phase transition in Gate 2 is still very hilarious to watch people still get knocked off by that. Considering you cannot just like execute Vulcan right away, he has to do the Ghost transition, and it's like a litmus test of who can actually like dodge AoEs, because there's no point attacking him during that time. It's literally just walk around in a half semicircle and then circle around back in an S shape to behind a pillar, and then to the safe spot away from where the pillars are going to explode, is essentially how you can get through it, by just holding the right mouse button down and also not trailing each other. So there is some minor teamwork involved, and it's a very interesting like transition mechanism that I always thought was very fair. Like it's troubling until you learn how to do it, but once you learn how to do it, it actually feels really trivial. Like it's really hard and then it's really trivial. There's not really like an in-between ground. But making it up to that point and actually surviving, or either that they just usually use a sidereal to Balthor it, and just block all the knockoff mechanics, as well as giving yourself protection so you don't have to do anything, is another way around it. Was how people actually cleared like the runs to begin with in its release time, because a lot of people didn't know how to do that at first, right? So what I usually did was, in those times of learning phases, was that when people did Balthor, I didn't just stand there and be like, oh yeah, I'm protected. Like, I thought further into the future, going like, one of these days, this is not going to be available. Like, we're either going to be way too powerful, or like, we're not going to have the sidereal in time. Any of these numerous factors could occur. So basically, every time Balthor occurred, I tried to make sure that the number 0 never occurred on top of my character. A 0 meant that I got hit, which means I would be knocked off theoretically if I didn't have Balthor. So basically, the practice every time during all those learning runs was that like Balthor goes off and the thing starts, the transition, and then I run, and then if I see 0 numbers ever show up on my character, it means I did the dodge perfectly, and Balthor is not needed for me in future runs. Like, I just have to exercise that a few more times and solidify the concept in. And that essentially like was like a mechanic like solved in my head like permanently. Then it became like it's the same thing with like the first mechanic too. A lot of the mechanics in the raids in Lost Ark's experience sort of bank on previous runs, but the problem with the current structure right now is that they sort of boost new players past all the previous structures, so that they don't actually even get to learn like the easier like raid experiences before they encounter the harder raid mechanics, and they all sort of like compound on top of each other. So for instance, like Vaulting Gate 1, there is the orb mechanic from the wolf summoning like a bunch of orbs, and people have to grab it in order and alternating colors. And usually people go in a clock formation clockwise from 1 to all the way to like 11. But the trick with that one is like a lot of people seem to have problems with coordinating that alone. But the real trick is really you just have to commit to a position that you wanted for yourself, and you look at the person before you who's supposed to grab. That's it. You don't need to look at the person ahead of you. You don't need to look at the person who's at the beginning. You just have to look at the one person who is before you. That's how easy that mechanic is. This is why I mean it's fairly trivial. And you want to grab it as fast as possible because it reduces the stagger resistance on the boss in the middle, charging up a raid wipe. So that mechanic is absolutely very trivial. But the other thing is like there is this mechanic that exists in an Abyss dungeon in Tier 2 that nobody really ever experiences anymore, since we're all in Tier 3 structure now. Tier 2 is like completely nerfed, is completely ignored. Those Abyss dungeons are just card runs. People try to just one-shot the boss, etc. You'll barely ever see it, or if you see the mechanic, it almost always fails, so then they just re-roll and try and burst the boss again in the next run before you can actually start the mechanic, and so they try to kill him mid-attack or something, because he's still vulnerable and doesn't throw like 99% DR being unkillable. And that's the turtle. The turtle in Tier 2 Abyss Dungeon does a very similar mechanic prior to Vaultin that summons a bunch of electric and water orbs that you have to grab and periodically rotate, because when you grab the electric orb, you get a debuff, and if you take another electric orb, you get blasted and you go bouncing. Same with water. If you take 2 waters, you get blasted and go bouncing. So in that, you're supposed to grab the orb, rotate with the next person to the right, and grab like the opposite element, which would be water or electric if you grabbed electric or water first. And that would dispel the buff, and you do that 2 times. That's it. You do it 2 times, and then the boss does their raid wipe thing, and nobody dies if you perform that successfully as a party. That's kind of the first instance of a similar mechanic that new players won't really see before they reach Vaultin anymore now. And Vicus is very similar in that sense too. Vicus has orbs again, except this time you have to drag them into a gate. The timing as well as like the hitbox on that, I think could be improved to be way more clear, because it's very, very it's very inaccurate. Even as an experienced player now, I understand exactly like the hitbox and its duration before the color change. Before it used to cause like raid wipes and whatever and other things very easily, and then they nerfed the color sequence down by two variations, so that there's only 3 variations instead of 5 now. And you basically have 2 chances instead of 1 to get it into the gate at the proper color match. But one of the things like for Vicus is very similar, like again, to deal with these orbs and clock positions. Basically you have to know clock positions, which you'll learn in Vaultin very quickly. and pretty much that orb system in the first gate is probably one of the hardest things to pick up as a new player. But in 3-color fashion, it's much easier to manage now because you at least get 2 chances before the boss finishes charging up and wipes. So for those who don't know, you should take your time and try and understand like getting the correct color into the gate properly. And it just goes red, green, blue, and red, green, blue. That's it. It's just those 3 colors. It used to be red, green, blue, white, black, red. So it was kind of rough back then. So it's like basically experienced players who knew was like you can only miss 1 orb in hard, and in normal you can miss 2 orbs out of the 4 that are spawned per player because the parties get split in that. So that was a difficulty. Not only that is like the hitbox of the orb for aggro to tether it to the player it's closest to, as well as like absorbing the orb by accident, is also really awful. And then kiting it around and not running into each other makes it a lot harder too, because you can't really go in the middle because the boss is summoning like a huge puddle in the middle that will insta-kill you if you walk in there. So that's actually quite a difficult mechanic for a new player to pick up on. And I actually just believe that the hitboxes and the tether on the balls should actually just be more visually accurate or something. That's the biggest improvement I think would actually help a lot of players, because it's very uncertain of like where the hitbox is or like where the absorb box is. This is like a same issue within like Brelshaza Gate 1 on hard mode when the boss has to do the counter mechanic in the middle and a bunch of ice arrows are being shot in. I have seen so many times during the counter mechanic, after I go counter and I run around to block ice arrows, I see people hovering around an ice arrow trying to eat it, and they just don't know where to stand to eat the ice arrow, and you're just trailing it, trailing it and walking the arrow with it into the party, and then it hits the middle and explodes, and then the counter fucks up, and then the boss pounds the map, and then everybody loses like 70k health, and maybe like 3 of the 8 party members are suddenly dead. So, but the trick on that one is that like for that one, there's actually a blue shadow underneath the ice arrow that you can actually walk your character into, and it's completely accurate. That'll absorb the arrow. But again, it's not visibly clear that this is a thing until like somebody tells you, or like you realize it on your own someday. Which is problematic to new players and even some experienced players who never understood how that hitbox detection works. I noticed this blue little spark underneath the arrow. So don't try and like touch the arrow because like depth perception might fuck with you. Touch that blue like little shiny thing underneath the arrow, and you'll absolutely eat the arrow all the way through. Like no problem. And the arrow doesn't hurt, like doesn't kill you at all. It's you have to catch it. Even if you are countering, you should just catch it. Like never let it reach the center. If you let it reach the center, your chance of failing that gate is like way higher all of a sudden. So just, similar mechanics and similar problems in some of these raids. I actually think gate 1 to 3 on Clown is probably one of the most challenging things a new player has. Even if they nerf those mechanics or like nerf the raid wipes or whatever, I still think Clown is one of the most challenging raids that Lost Ark has to offer. I actually enjoy Clown very much because it's so challenging. Whereas I know a lot of other people would disagree otherwise, and I did it at min-eye level with no support at one point during its release, and during Reaper's release, actually on the first week of Reaper's release, because there were so many Reapers around, there was like a lack of supports everywhere. So I just ran in-house with some friends, and we went like nutto with 4-player DPS with no support. It was, and we were min-eye level, so it was just hell, but we actually did it. And like almost nobody runs Clown at min-eye level anymore. Everybody's like trying to just skip or trying to get it done as fast as possible or whatever nowadays because of homework burnout. And the thing with Clown was that honestly the fastest run I ever did in Clown was 9 minutes, all 3 gates. It's basically like each gate was just like a blitz. But that's assuming like all 4 people are like drug addicts, drinking like atropine, throwing dark grenades, using like everything in the book on their battle bar item. That's all 4 players, by the way, and nobody being a cheapo. So that's the only way you can get like such a timing. And that's also like paired with like a burst class, as well as like a damage enhancer, as well as like a strong support that has a lot of like cards and whatever and everything else that is purely built for damage boosting. 0 heals are being dropped. So those are some of the other things that can be improved. I played both support and like DPS classes, so I understand like a bunch of synergies as well as like characters and things put together. My pacing of the game was actually quite a bit more relaxed because I wasn't feeling like I was forced to make content and guides like I did in BDO, which was always a bit stressful. Like it sort of ruined my game experience a little bit. And this time around, I was more private when I was playing Lost Ark, and I barely shared much of anything. So my game experience was quite vastly different, and I enjoyed it much more. But as the game progressed as well, like friends became inactive, people were burnt out. I still enjoy the game quite a lot. Actually, I'll try and make more guides for Lost Ark currently because a lot of content creators left, and I feel like there's a number of things that I could probably provide as guides that could help people shorten their dailies and homework time if they haven't already. Because for me, it takes only about like 2 hours to complete all 6 characters of dailies, or less sometimes. And I don't really do them every day either because it's just that's kind of crazy doing that much dailies every day when you don't even have rest bonus. I do like maybe like 2 characters not on rest bonus, and the rest I just let them do it every other day kind of deal, just to prevent burnout as well as like just chores. There are things they can definitely improve to alleviate that. Like I really believe that they should cut down chaos dungeon runs by 1 count entirely without losing the same amount of rewards. So the rewards should be equivalent to what it is now, but the run count is only 1 to yield the same amount as before. Same with guardian raids. So like if you have rest bonus, it will consume 2 of those charges or whatever, and it will drop 4 guardian souls, for instance. Or if you just have no rest bonus, you kill at 1, you just drop two guardian souls for you. That's it. Simple as that. Same amount of rewards, just less runs. That's what it should be, and I think that would save a lot of time for a lot of people, including myself, as well as improve the gameplay experience, and also allow like rest periods for players to just take a break from the game. Like we shouldn't have to be feeling like needing to be logged on 24/7. I get that. It's the same issue I had with BDO, and those were like part of like goals I was trying to push, which I've completed all of them, and I don't have any goals anymore in BDO. Is why I'm not really going back anytime soon. Is why a lot of people kept asking me if I'm going back to BDO with an influx of this. As I said before, just as a side note to the BDO things, I noticed the seasons servers and like the new player stuff is all like overrun and mass influx of players right now. I understand that. It's like what I said before I quit BDO as well too. The new player experience to BDO is like overwhelming, but it's also like you have so much to do. Is also it is a lot of things, but it's also like a lot of stuff to do. Whereas like at my point in the game, there was not a lot to do. I've kind of tried everything. I completed almost everything at the point of where I quit, and I was like almost hard cap for like a long while of like 710 gear score or something like that, and that was nearly 2 years ago. And that's sort of like where things are now. I know they gave out a recent Dream Horse, added a fail stack system to the T10 horse and stuff. So I was just like, yeah, like there's still no like real like incentive for me to come back. Like I would go grind the Ocean Null, but that's not an exciting grind. It's not a fun grind, and it's just more or less like soul crushing. So I'd rather go enjoy different games like Elden Ring, like I have on stream recently, Lost Ark, which still provides like challenge. Lost Ark I still enjoy very much because it provides that niche that Vindictus used to have. It provides the difficulty and challenges in some of the raids, especially in Inferno content. Very exciting for me. Not for everybody, obviously. And then the other thing was like the amount of different classes I can experience, as well as different gameplay variety, was also very interesting. The difference between like DPS constant uptime classes versus like burst classes can vary like very vastly. Burst classes can usually perform a lot better than constant DPS classes, only if you understand like the breakpoints and the damage windows in a raid or whatever. If you do not understand like breakpoints or like opportunities or like damage uptime windows that are available to you as a burst class, you can perform extremely poor compared to a constant DPS uptime class, because a constant DPS uptime class is actually much better for learning because you are constantly just glued to the boss, but you also have a lot more mobility as well as like movement and skills to spam through to really figure out where all the openings and like danger spots are in a raid. So that's what you're practicing when you're playing like a DPS constant uptime class. You're practicing your uptime really, because your uptime equals real damage. Whereas a burst class, for instance, like my Deathblade here, I play Surge. It's all about throwing like my biggest hit before the boss jumps away, so that my cooldowns are counting down. So by the time it comes back, the cooldowns are ready to go, and I'm ready for another big hit. So he's taking one big hit when he leaves and a big hit when he comes back. Right, so usually after Clown Raid, I got a bit off topic there about classes, but usually after Clown Raiding and Vicus, I consider the first 3 Legion commanders more like introductory Legion commanders. Bolton is very fair. Vicus is actually quite fair as well as like new players who meet Vicus are also they get a little horny. Clown, I think, is an absolute circus. It really teaches you frustrations in the game at first. After getting that first clear though, a well-earned first clear that isn't like just some juiced giga carry run on Clown was actually really satisfying. Like for the first week or 2 of Clown's release, I burned about like 180 like splendid elemental potions, which is like the most expensive potion available, and it was absolutely crushing. Like a lot of my potion resource disappeared there, but eventually like it became a concerted effort of just sitting up and being focused, playing and finding and just staring at the boss most of the time, and not taking greed attacks and running into a brick wall like a forehead most of the time. It was playing more and more careful, and my pot usage went from like 30, 40 like per session down to like 10, 12, then eventually down to like 5, 4, and then to like only like 1 or 2 at some point. And it was just like learning patterns and regular patterns before doing big mechs. But the big mechs in Gate 1 of Clown was not that bad. They were actually quite straightforward. I actually liked the mini game like problems that it showcased. Gate 2 was also equally as challenging because it showed it brought in like the Vulcan knockoff mechanics on that, which on a much smaller arena too, that isn't even like a full circle. And the theme of I think the design and theme of Clown was actually really interesting too, given that it actually felt like a carnival, felt like a festival, casino gambling and all that stuff. Like it was all very thematic and very consistent, which I appreciated from the devs. And just the labyrinth maze was a bit annoying at first. It still is annoying to this day because you're just trying to clear it as fast as possible, but for like a first couple time experience, it was kind of interesting. Interesting like mechanic or whatever. Same with the card reveal when you have to find the correct cards. People weren't really thinking too much when it first was like brought out. We had the luxury of Korean guides being available already, whereas like I always sat around doing some of these raids thinking like, how did the first groups of players in Korea just clear this? Because they have no guides. They had to do this completely blind, figure it all out. And by the time it reached NA West and EU, essentially, we had a plethora of all these guys just available already. And even then, that sort of like diminished, I feel like, the gameplay experience. And then we reached Brelshaza, which was like a really hyped up point at some point of the game, but it had 6 gates. Everybody was really excited for the 6 gates at first, and then you fast forward to today and everybody's like, man, it's 6 gates, like I don't want to do 6 fucking gates. And that's a reasonable take. Like in its launch, it was an exciting experience. In its tenure, it is a very choreful and tedious experience. One of the issues I have actually in particular with Gate 5 and 6 Brelshaza is a huge problem of like why I don't actually even want to do 5, 6 normally or often, if at all. I only do it to help a few friends through, or either that get some new players their first clears, or if I'm just seeking like spare extra gold because I have a lot of free time that week for some reason, which is poor use of time anyways. The problems I have with Gate 5 and 6 is because the mechanics are sort of time gated and also like really annoying to deal with. It's like you get punished for doing well, and gates 1 to 4 is not like that. Gates 1 to 4 is like if you play well and smash the boss even harder, the run goes faster. Whereas like in Gate 5 and 6, you smash the boss harder or too fast, you get punished for it and you die. Like that is something that they should actually go back and look at. When I saw some of the emergency streams where they were talking about like completely axing like a gate off or like whatever, I think this is completely stupid to do, to axe off an entire chapter of content when really it should actually just be readdressed and revamped in some way. Gate 5, for instance, you have to gather those stupid little like black or white shapes and get a number of them above your head. The thing is like when you get those, like that alone is annoying. Like if you burst Brelshaza too much, she'll summon so many shapes and it'll just like fire all over the damn place. And if you catch too many or too little, or like you push her past the point where everybody before they had their like shape cleared, then you're screwed for the shape drop mechanic, which is really annoying because now you have to restart the run, or if somebody misses the meteor, the failure point is like so high and it takes such a lengthy amount of time to get there is why it feels like it's forever. And same with the 2 stagger mechanic. The stagger is like one side has to stagger first before the other side staggers, otherwise if they staggered in the wrong order it explodes and everybody dies kind of deal. There's probably a better way of addressing that too, I think, between teams. Like I don't know if you can just like burst one really hard and then just run over to the other side and burst the other one really hard and then burst her in the middle, whereas like people split off and go counter in the middle. If you want to do that without sidereal. Even worse on hard because there's so many counters that it's almost like not optional to do it without sidereal. And then gate 6, it's the meteors. The meteors are on fixed timers, which is really annoying. The blue meteors are on fixed timers, so if you push to a gold meteors are fixed on like the 37 bar, so it's like 137, 87 or something like that, and 37. And then like the main problem I have with gate 6 Brelshaza is time gated blue meteor assignments that are random and have no real like indicator of when they're coming. I wish there was an indicator of when they're coming, because people having to call out time in chat or whatever, or like whatever in pub parties. I'm not assuming static parties, because those people have that stuff solved and whatever. But for pub parties, which should be still completable on a normal mode anyways, it's so ass. Like even if I know what's going on, the 7 other people that I'm party with may or may not know what's going on. So it's really annoying, and that's where all the gatekeeping comes from. So that's actually like problematic for the game itself. It's not welcoming in that sense, and it's also unclear, as well as like the problems and mechanics at that stage of the game starts becoming visually unclear, visually vague, poorly designed in my opinion. If they wanted to show blue meteors on a random timer without an indicator, it'd probably be better to assign like just random blue dots showing on top of people's heads, but they all appear at the same time. And the thing is, like, this is just a suggestion, by the way, of an idea mechanic to change this to make it better visually, like, prepared for people doing the run. As an idea, I don't know if they'll ever do it, or if they'll even see this video anyways. The thing is, like, if you have like 3 dots above every character's head, right? Everybody gets assigned 1 dot at first, and then a second dot gets assigned. So you know a blue meteor is coming, essentially. But the people who get assigned the blue meteor, they get a 3rd dot that lights up on their head, and it'll light up all 3 dots, essentially. And then that pretty much tells them, like, in the next, like, 2 seconds, like, you see that flash of blue above your head. It's like a neon blue, essentially. And basically, they're going to get assigned the meteor. Same timer of where they have to drop the meteor, but it's just, like, now you have actually a visual gauge of when the meteor is going to come, so people can either make the decision to burst the boss to a gold meteor, or hold damage for a second there, and then drop the blue meteors before pushing her to the gold meteor. Whereas without this indicator I'm suggesting, everybody's just running around, hovering around at like an 88 bar or like an 89 bar, waiting for the blue meteor assignment to come. Then they drop the meteor, then they hit the boss. They don't really have an active like full-on accurate assessment of the situation, other than just bumbling around with hands on their dicks waiting for the fucking blue meteors to come through, or to just straight up just push her straight into the gold meteor and go into it. This is again what makes gate 6 also feel very long, and if you fail upon that, then it's just like the whole run fails and you restart, and then you have to go through all that again on top of a cutscene in the middle of the thing that also adds more downtime to the experience, which is very debilitating and depressing to do. And the rewards at the end don't even feel that substantial for the amount of strife that you have to go through. This is the main problems with gate 5 and 6 Brelshaza. 1 to 4, I can clear that in like 30 minutes or like 35 minutes. on normal with just myself being the like only like the biggest juicer character in there. Like 1 to 2 can take 15 minutes, and 3 to 4 takes like another 20 minutes or so, and that's it. That's assuming like there was no failure, and like half the party is at least alive, or like a little bit more than half the party, like 4 to 5 people are alive in every single gate, and like that's like the fast timing I've had, and when I just like ferrying some people through. And I'm not charging buses either. I just do it because I just want to get it done and out of the way, and so I can go play other games and have a day to myself. And then the issue is also like the gear score and gear eye levels and whatever. I noticed like almost even myself, I do a minor bit of gatekeeping. It's just more or less like because in the lower raids, I find that eye level is so easily obtained these days that like for when I host Vicus parties, I only accept like people at like eye level 1480 or higher, and not 1475. 1460 is the entry, so it's like 20 eye levels above it. But I think it's actually like really obtainable and easy to get 1480 now. I see like Slayers going up to like 1580 on the first week of its release, which is like okay. Like those are probably like giga whales, but then I'm not a giga whale, and even I raised like a Slayer to like 1500 in like the first 2 weeks or something, and I was like, yeah, that was incredibly easy with like no swiping. It was just doing the events, doing the hyper expressive pass, and just using all the mats and whatever. Obviously I had like some pre-existing mats too, but like I don't think a new player would be that far behind in that sense. As usually only like I only do like plus 20 eye levels in terms of gatekeeping, but then I see other people going like 1520 only, and then I was like, this is ridiculous. And then I joined like another party, it's like, oh, 1540 plus only for Vicus. I'm like, this isn't any faster than if the whole party was just 1500. Why do you need an additional 40 eye levels on top of this when you're gonna blitz the boss to 0 anyways? You're just gonna be standing there and running around waiting for mechanics to happen. Now you're just playing lobby simulator and job interview more than you are playing the game, which again also adds to the burnout of a lot of players because of this mindset that well, I don't know. It's just a mindset that was just developed within the game structure itself. I don't blame the player. I blame like sort of like the game design system pushing verticals over and over and over like that. Like I can take on FF14 as an example where you can push your verticals up over and over and over, but the dungeon design doesn't matter because it scales you down to like a certain cap of stats where you'll be like 100% effective, but you're not like overcured to the point where you're just one shot the boss. You still have to work with your party of like your healer and your 2 DPSs as a tank, vice versa or whatever, and they have scaled content essentially. Like they have a range of stats that are viable up to this point. And obviously like you want to feel powerful, but there's a certain point where the power is so much and immense that it doesn't make sense to just like gatekeep anything under that anymore. So, and that's not to say like that's a good thing either, because people in some of the raids I've also experienced as well, because they're so overgeared, they think they don't have to do mechanics anymore. And it's actually even more baffling to see that because everybody can think they can just be an overgear head and skip mechanics and completely ignore them altogether. Whereas, like I said before, Vulcan is a very fair fight. At Ghost Transition, you cannot skip that. You have to deal with Ghost Transition. Some people find it annoying. Some people find it like, oh, this is funny as hell. But it really shows. Like, you could be 1600 gear score and still die there by that singular hit that knocks you off the arena. I think that's perfectly fine. Considering how slow those attacks are, they are not rapid at all. And like there are way more fast attacks that occur in Clown, Brelshaza, and Kyango compared to that Vulcan Ghost Transition. The Vulcan Ghost Transition, like the attacks are very slow and choreographed. As you get to the further raids, like if you go backwards, you'll be like, wow, this is like slow as molasses. Because you've been trained up to that point if you've been like constantly going through every single leg raid back to back, instead of just skipping all of them and just going to like the furthest one available currently. Then you'll go back and be like, what the hell? But I find that the attacks are actually very slow and choreographed, very fair, and that's why I was like, you know, Vulcan is a great example of like where Legion raids were really good. His mechanics were fair, his mechanics of breaking the armor, it taught a bit of everything essentially, like counter, it taught destruction, it taught stagger, and all these things you need to know. None of these things are gear oriented, and that's my point with that like some of the gatekeeping doesn't even make sense. I've sat in some lobbies for like 20 minutes because they just want to fill it for like 1560, 1580 juicers for a 1500 recommended eye level run. And we fail and take longer than when I was doing it with a prog party of like 1520s. And I don't know what's more depressing. The fact that there's so much damage in the party that when a stagger mech comes up, the stagger is like non-existent. And we just constantly die to stagger mechs over and over. Gate 4 Brelshaza. So it's unbelievable. Whereas I run with some friends where we have so much stagger, we actually just throw away grudge and damage engravings because we know the other 4 randoms that join in aren't going to have that we just make all the stagger mechs so trivial that the run just clears on one pull all the time. And we don't even have to summon Wei, we don't have to summon a Nana because the stagger on the team is like ridiculously absurd. We got a Paladin, we got a Scrapper, Destroyer, and a Gunlancer on one team. That stagger bar is non-existent. The other side fails the yellow mech, the 2 Destroyer and Gunlancer just insta break the bar with me being Scrapper. I do target focus, I don't even bring traditional skills in, and then all of a sudden that bar just gets eviscerated to 0 in like a split second. And then when it goes to Star Mech, that stuff disappears like almost instantaneously. Half the bar is gone before the dial's even like 1/4 cleared on the star itself. But a lot of parties don't do this. Like my most successful Gate 4 Brelshazas all the time is my Scrapper, my Slayer, my Deathblade as well. Deathblade has a crazy amount of stagger for a large bar if you actually know how to cycle your surge really, really fast, because you don't need damage at that point. You just need to get the surge off as like an extra stagger hit, and refreshing your skill rotation like a psycho is the way to get there for a huge amount of stagger. Changing your skill pods, your skill tripods as well is very beneficial there. Stacking a lot of overwhelm runes, which people won't do because they're too stuck to meta community guides or whatever with like Gale Winds and Conviction Judgments or Focus or whatever, or Rage. Nobody uses fucking overwhelm runes. They just put quick recharge and try to get more DPS in when, like, you know, at the end board, I always see myself with Cruel Annihilator and everybody else just like Annihilator. So those are the things that are like sorely lacking, that are causing artificial difficulty in a lot of the runs, is like stagger, destruction, and counter mechanics, which are completely void of any sort of like DPS or gear oriented things. Any skill, even if the skill has no stagger rating on it, causes stagger. It's only your basic attack does like 1 point of stagger damage, but any skill, I think it was like 20 points on average. And then like anything higher than that is like low, mid high, or high or highest is like goes up to like 120 plus or something like that. And vital hit point classes, Paladin has like the biggest stagger ever if you have vital hit point on him. Like the fastest amount of stagger in a short amount of time. Artist is also pretty high. Bard as well, if you switch up a bunch of like skills as well, like Sonic Vibration can hit twice, and it's also weak point level 2. That can also trigger twice if you take the chain vibration, so it'll hit twice. So, you know, there's a lot of different builds and things that people should sort of kind of experiment when doing the Guardian raid of Monkey Hanumatan or whatever, or Hannah Montana or whatever. That same issue comes up too. There's a lot of destruction mechanics and counter that have to occur there. The stagger is fairly light in that raid, but the penalties for not destruction or counter is very severe in those runs. And succeeding in them actually rewards you with more damage cooldowns and defense damage reductions for yourself. So it goes both ways. There's not really a middle ground. If you do not do the destruction or counter and stagger in Monkey, then you get punished really hard throughout the run. If you succeed in all of them, you just do crazily more damage. So you're just rewarded for good gameplay, and you are punished for poor gameplay. So I don't really think that there's anything wrong with that. It's just more or less like people should actively try and improve their own gameplay anyways. We're not talking about like min-max or sweaty, but at least just like solving mechanics. Min-max or sweaty is like maximizing your uptime and being glued to the boss and trying to figure out all like the windows and whatever in your burst windows with your support and whatever. That's min-max or sweatiness. But solving big mechanics, minor trivial mechanics in raids and whatever, I think is at least like mandatory for like all players, whether you're casual or not. I've played with casuals who don't even play these kinds of action games, and they have flourished from not knowing how to even spacebar or like aim their character to being able to complete like the hardest runs that I see other people failing at who think they're super good, and I don't know why they're so maxed out on their ego. And then I show up with like 40 less eye level than them, less cards, less gems, and still outperform them on MVP 1 screen, and I'm just like, your ego and pride does not match where you should be. Like, you should probably look inwards a little bit. So, that's my Lost Ark experience so far. Other than that, like, yeah, I believe homework should be reduced. I think Brelshaza Gate 5 and 6 should be looked at and, like, adjusting what I said. It shouldn't be, like, punishing for what should be a run that's... It's like you're being punished for good gameplay, essentially. Like, that's what it feels like for 5 and 6. I can't say the same for 1 to 4. 1 to 4 actually feel okay. Gate 3 is usually pretty funny because it's people who say, like, they can't do shapes or whatever, or, like, it's literally that one mechanic. It's just shapes. That either determines either if the whole party is dead, or half the party is dead, or nobody's dead. So that's... the Gate 3 Brelshaza is kind of funny. And people who... I've heard many excuses before, too. People are like, oh, I'm colorblind, that's why I can't do stars. I'm like, well, go to the options and turn on go to accessibility, turn on colorblind mode, okay? That's not a real problem that you're describing. So yeah. In any case, yeah, that's so far my Lost Ark experience. I actually do enjoy, like, the different amounts of progression that the game has. I'm also running, like, a strange side focus build that's not exactly favorable, and I still perform okay. Still on MVP boards and whatnot with side focus. Is again having to know where to use the 30-second window timer. It's not as effective as Keen Blunt Weapon and Cursed Doll, but I also don't have like 400,000 gold like a whale to swipe for the accessories accessible to make that happen. And that's a ridiculous, absurd amount of gold that I put into other characters to essentially power them up too. And pushing to 1580 right now is kind of demoralizing because of the low rates and the amount of absurd resources you need for it. So I'm just sort of taking my time pacing there, doing homework and whatever. Usually I get all my raids done by like Thursday, Friday, unless I'm waiting or holding for friends, and that's pretty much it. So thanks so much for watching, and I will come back with some guides on like each small section of Lost Ark in much shorter formats, probably like less than 5 minutes because this is very long. And if you made it up to here, thanks so much for listening, and thanks for viewing the video, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.